Okay, hello, welcome to H3, the show about health, hope, and happiness. I am Alan Friesen, otherwise known as the Acapellist. With me is my brother Scott Sweetman. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you tonight, Alan? Hot?
Excellent, excellent. Really looking forward to our discussion.
Excellent. Yeah, it's very interesting tonight. And I have to apologize. I didn't get a show preview out in time. I got tied up doing what I do to make a living, which I also enjoy. And sorry. well,
No
we
worries.
have our next week's planned. I'll get them out this week, so there'll be a lot of warning. But tonight, we're going to talk about an interesting study that was just released. It's only been released in Spanish so far, although a lot of English media has worked on the translation. But it brings back a topic that really rose to prominence in the mid 1990s by a fellow, Terence. What was Terence's last name? Checking my notes here. And really what it comes down to is the theory of the stoned ape. Have you heard it described that way?
Well, there was a reference to that in the movie Fantastic Fungi, and I think it's probably the same kind of reference, but explain it for our viewers.
Yeah. So the stoned ape hypothesis was by Terence McKenna in the 1992 or 1994. Easy to look up. And his hypothesis was that early human ancestors ingested, and Al and I were playing around with trying to find out how this is properly pronounced. Psilocybin is the way I found it was pronounced, but Al, you have a slightly different pronunciation.
I've always pronounced it as psilocybin, but either way, we know what it's talking about. Magic mushrooms basically is what the street term would be for psilocybin or psilocybin, whichever way you pronounce it. So yeah.
And just so everyone's clear on this, we're not promoting drug use or against it. This is just, it was in the news this morning actually again, and it's, our show is about health and wellness, and there's been a lot of research put into the use of psilocybin in restoring health and increasing health. And this article and the theory of the stoned ape put forward the hypothesis that it's nothing new to humankind, that in fact, the big transition from Homo erectus to Homo sapien, which is largely to do with an expansion in our cognitive ability, was due to our habitual consumption of plants that contained psilocybin in some other forms. And it increased visual acuity, creativity, social bonding. The translation of the Spanish was even more blunt to that. It said food drive and sex drive were increased, thereby ensuring the survival of the human race. So I thought that was a little more direct, probably because of the translation. But those and the development of complex social structures, because a lot of research says that psilocybin, one of the things it does is it expands consciousness. So that's the stoned ape hypothesis. But the article that I'm referring to, these scientists went in a multidisciplinary study, and they looked at, first of all, the availability of psilocybin in historical ecosystems. Like, was it something that was always available? Was it something that is modern in development in terms relative to human existence, and how that could have affected humankind? And their research suggested quite strongly that are possibly, and they say, look, a lot more research needs to be done. We're not saying that we have the definitive answer, but we believe that our research shows that there is definitely proof that the human experience has been influenced by psilocybin substances, and intentionally. Perhaps not intentionally to begin with. I mean, we were pretty much scavengers and ate whatever, and if it didn't kill us or make us sick, we kept eating. Which is interesting, because one of the things they note as proof is that humans, it's not toxic to us. right? It's not poisonous to us. I mean, you
Right.
can overdose on it, but it isn't inherently poisonous because we've developed an ability to metabolize it.
Cool. This study you said was in Spain, Spanish viewers?
It was published in Spanish. I believe it's out of Peru. The problem was I was working from translations of the original article because it was like a lot of psychology and medicine magazines were excited about it, so they were referring to the Spanish publication because they were writing in English, but there isn't an official translation of the study yet.
Got it.
Okay.
So it's a Spanish study, and then what you're looking at is the English interpretations of excerpts of that study. Is that kind of what it is?
Yeah, that's where I started. But then when I got researching it, there's been like crazy amounts of study. Well, that's relative term. I mean, and that's one of the things when, the whole issue of cannabis legalization came up. One of the arguments is because of the stigma, and especially with psychedelic substances like LSD or psilocybin and mushrooms, researchers are very scared to pursue that. Funding is a problem. Public image is a problem. So labs, universities, etc., seldom want to say, "Oh yeah, we're funding a druggy product," right? So there's that sort of ick factor in polite science that, study what you want, but street drugs or drugs that are used on the street, not really a topic we want to tell our shareholders or our board members that we're involved in, right?
Right, got it.
And it's relatively unregulated. So there's no big drug company that's going to make big bucks off of, psilocybin. So
can I share? I believe this came from the movie The Fantastic Fungi. Have you watched that movie?
yeah, we watched it with you.
Yeah. Oh yeah, good. Yeah. So I think this excerpt came in, and if I recall it correctly, there was a doctor in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in our lovely country, Canada, in 1957, who basically cured alcoholism for a bunch of people with one dose of psilocybin, one time. And so now you could see where the drug companies would not like this kind of an approach, right? That you take a natural substance, ingest it, and cured. You don't have to be on all kinds of other medications. You don't have to fill prescriptions every month or every week or every year, that kind of thing. So that and then the research stopped because of the negative connotations regarding it, but it's now come back in a flourish in terms of the survey or the one that you're referring to right now is obviously proof of that, right? So
well, and like John Hopkins, there's lots of places that are studying it. Some of them are larger academic centers that really don't rely on public correctness for their John Hopkins being one of them. If John Hopkins says we can study this, then well, probably it's legit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they did an examination on how a single psychedelic experience with psilocybin changes the way individuals attribute consciousness to various entities. And they quantified this. And so participants in the survey were given psilocybin in a controlled environment, controlled situation, and then surveyed. And it was found that they had an increase in attributing consciousness to insects, plants, fungi, and even inanimate objects. And for example, the attribution of consciousness to insects increased from 33% to 57%, and to plants from 26% to 61%. Further, it found that these belief changes were long-lasting and were held 8 years prior to when the actual survey was done. It still was true.
Wow, 8 years. That's amazing.
Yeah. Wow. So, and the Spanish article was talking, and again, this is through translation, so I'm doing my best, but it's supported by lots of other articles, and I have a whole list of them, that perhaps religion, philosophy, culture, magic, the things that have gone beyond the physical realm of humanity were part of our experience as a species consuming psilocybic compounds. Mushrooms, or there are other plants and animals that have similar, there's like poisonous frogs or something that also have like LSD, somewhat similar to whatever. And so that was the question that sort of arose out of this, is did our understanding of consciousness come from our experience? What do you think? Do you think it's...
Well, that was certainly what was also in the movie Fantastic Fungi, and it was, it wasn't a big part of the movie, but it was certainly sort of where, they kind of had the visualization of, a caveman type person, a pre-human type of an individual who then, ingested the psilocybin mushrooms and then had like a change in consciousness, right? And when you're talking about the connectivity to other living things, plants and animals and insects and that kind of a thing, I mean, that harkens back to indigenous beliefs about that we're all connected, right? That everything's connected, like that we're as part of nature, we are connected to everything else that's part of nature. And I mean, the indigenous folks would certainly believe that they could communicate with, animals, beavers, foxes, etc., and have a, what would you call it, a mutually beneficial relationship with everything, right? And that everything was there to kind of, we were just one part of this matrix of connectivity between living things, right? So yeah.
One of the things that was brought up in a lot of articles, and the Spanish study was no different, is how shamanic processes, and I know when I studied religion, it was interesting how many traditions and cultures have holy substances that the practitioners would take to tune them into another state of consciousness, to another reality. And indigenous cultures, but also when I looked at a bunch of the studies, there's quite a few of them that were on the ecosystem that these organisms, the mushrooms and other plants, flora, fauna, exist in. And basically it's worldwide. There is no place on earth that, we might have avoided exposure to these things, which I find is interesting. Mm-hmm. And so when we see that so many, North American Aboriginal communities, Asian Aboriginal communities, Middle Eastern, Asiatic, that we see a tradition of consumption of psilocybin and in other cases, other substances to raise that consciousness. And traditions have grown and become practices today. I mean, we all laugh, or some of us may laugh at thinking, oh, rocks and plants and insects having consciousness. But I'm a Christian. I can't see God. I've never seen him, her, it. It's something that I believe in. It's beyond my reality to comprehend, that at some point it's faith. And another way to say faith is another level of consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, yeah.
Because faith is almost at its truest point. I think faith is hard to define. And I know that one of the fourth year studies that I looked at when I was studying comparative religion was, I don't believe there's atheists. I believe that everyone believes in something beyond themselves, which kind of dovetails into this study, in that, my research was that, the old sort of adage, there are no atheists in foxholes, which is true. And quite often and unfortunately, it's when horrible things happen to us, we all, call out to the darkness and ask for help or salvation or to be spared, for a loved one. And, in my experience and research, very few people just say, okay, and carry on.
Right? Yeah.
So,
Hey, also just speaking of the interconnectedness and all that kind of thing, right? Which I makes a lot of sense to me, and it certainly resonates with my personal beliefs. But the if you recall from the movie The Fantastic Fungi, the whole thing about the mycelium, and
Yeah.
this is not specific to psilocybin mushrooms. This is any mushrooms, right? Mushrooms create this mycelium, this network underneath your feet that connects all basically the mushrooms, but also other living plants, animals, well, not animals, living plants, fauna, and they will actually communicate via the mycelium, and they can actually share nutrients via the mycelium. I mean, that's like amazing. And in terms of the kind of the interconnectedness, I think it also speaks about how we as human beings are supposed to have a similar connectivity and then be there for the mutual benefit of each other, kind of a thing, right? That, through that connections that we have, that we share resources, we share support, we share love, like that kind of, that's it kind of, there's a parallel is what it appears to me. So.
Yeah, and in that same vein, in science based, and I sort of have a theory that if I read, 6 or 7 articles that say, "Oh, this is the deal," I find one that says, "No, no, no, no," right? That I'm obligated to look at the other side of every question. I think that's good in any kind of research.
Sure.
So when I looked at this one, there's skepticism. I mean, modern scientists, there's not a lot of people that are going to say, "Oh yeah, stoned ape theory, we buy into that." So there was a lot of things attached to that, and a lot of cultural loading and things. But it's proven that psilocybin and related substances increase neural activity. They create hyperconnectivity in our brain waves. Again, John Hopkins has researched it. Lots of other places of research did all added in there. Enhanced neural connectivity. Biological Psychiatry published an article showing how that it improves not only dynamic interconnectivity, but also heightens communication between different regions of the brain. We start accessing areas that aren't normally active in our brain. And some of the processes are similar to dreaming. And that's some of the research that's been done, that parts of our brain that are on during dreaming, that are off during awake states. Psilocybin turns on some of those same areas of our brain when normally they're not on. So there's science behind all of this. We know these substances have effects on us. And John Hopkins is one of the groups that has been exploring this as a possibility to changing it from an illegal substance in all cases to one that could be medically useful and prescribed in certain cases. And again, PTSD, addiction, like you said, alcohol. There's some personal stories. There's a woman that treated her eating disorder by microdosing on psilocybin, and the medical results, she shares that openly. So on the other side, there's whether the whole stoned ape and whether human consciousness is because of magic mushrooms, believe that or not, but there's science behind all of it saying that these substances do have what certainly appear to be curative effects. Now there's bad effects. I mean, LSD and mushrooms, and there's been, deaths and all sorts of things that's contributed to, like alcohol, like many other things. But unlike recreational alcohol, it appears that psilocybin does have legitimate and provable benefits to us as an organism. Where do you fit on that scale?
Well, are you familiar with Government of Canada initiatives regarding psilocybin right now?
No.
Okay, well, here is what my understanding is, and this is right here in our community. There is a producer of psilocybin mushrooms who's doing under contract for the federal government. And the thought process is, if I understand it correctly, is that in very short order, psychiatrists, and only psychiatrists, I guess, will be able to write a script for psilocybin mushrooms as a curative for people, as you've identified, PTSD, addictions, eating disorders, those kind of things, right? Depression, those sort of things. And it's becoming it's surprising who you hear that is referencing psilocybin. I was recently in a Tony Robbins event,
Mhm.
and I'm taking a course with Tony Robbins. And Tony Robbins in the event talked about, and this was to do with depression. Yeah, this was to do with depression. And basically, they were comparing the normal drugs that are related to depression. And many times, of course, it takes months to get the right drug, right? And then the results from that were like a moderate reduction in the depression symptoms, right? After like a year of taking the right med, like a moderate, like a 15% reduction in the depression kind of a thing. And then he shared in that presentation about psilocybin being a protocol, an alternative treatment, in that one dose or a couple doses only, or all it took in order to make the depression go away. And a year later, still away. 2 years later, still away. So if you compare the standard drug type approaches that we do, which of course the drug manufacturers want to keep on rating them scripts, right? But if you compare that and the side effects from that versus like the information that I hear. I haven't suffered from depression, so I can't like speak to this or anything. But in terms of the value that it provides from taking a natural substance, which generally isn't going to have any side effects either, right? So, I think there's huge potential, and I certainly hope that for the people that it would make a difference for, that they are able to get access to that, and as a curative for them, and to help them live better lives, right? I mean, that'd be amazing. So,
Absolutely. And it's interesting how, with advances in civilization, what we call civilization, it's funny how we close the door. Not funny, ironic, how we close the door on a lot of things that in the past have been left open to the
yeah,
individual or to groups to decide for themselves. But I was in this process, I was reading about the genomic uh, evolution of psilocybin. And about 57 million years ago, based on archaeological records, it shifted from primarily being a wood decomposing to herbivore dung, where it grew, and it split. And it's interesting because in the archaeological record, it it connects with a lot that was going along geographically at the time, things that were influencing human evolution and development and animal species. So there's a lot of proof that we've been cohabitating with these substances for a very long time. Only recently, when I first moved to Japan, actually, magic mushrooms were legal. They could be sold in stores.
oh
Uh,
really?
they
In
were
Japan?
not a controlled substance at all. So,
Wow. They
and
were not a controlled substance in Japan at that time.
no,
No.
no.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. Stores sold them openly,
Okay.
and there was a controversy. My understanding of Japanese media when they first got there was not huge, but there was controversy because a young fellow had bought these magic mushrooms, maybe not understood dosage or something. Under the influence, he crawled up on the roof of his house. He fell off the roof of his house and died.
Hmm.
And so the media was saying, well, some parts of the media, most of the media was saying, oh, in the US and Europe, these are outlawed drugs. Why in Japan are they legal? We need to enact legislation to move them into the illegal status. And, by the time I left Japan, it's not something that I was consciously aware of. But I do remember, I think it was successfully turned into at least more enforced. And in Japan, like a lot of countries, there's a difference between the letter of the law and what the constabulary or the judiciary actually feel need to be enforced or are relevant or important for the betterment of that society. So the point being is that it seems that we think it's forward thinking to limit exposure to these substances as a way of preventing harm to society. But then on the other hand, research often comes back and says, really? Is that, do they really hurt us? Or do we just need to know more about them and
Hmm.
how they could help us? which I
Right.
think is an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I know that this isn't directly related to your comment, but Dr. Gabor Mate talks about a psychedelic experience in terms of to help alleviate or remove trauma, past trauma in a person's life. And he talks so much about set and setting, right? That that the person who's going to ingest this substance is in a very safe environment. They felt held and protected, that kind of thing, and safe. And I watched a video where he was actually assisting a person, and it wasn't with, I think it was MDMA is what he was using for that particular person, but it was a person who had stage 4 cancer, and they were just lying. He was lying down, and Dr. Mate was just kind of like holding his hand on his chest and just kind of being with him. And then the medication or the substance kicked in, and he had this amazing experience, and it was like kind of being wrapped in love, kind of a thing, is what I think the gentleman with had cancer was expressing it. Long and the short of it, anyway, so set and setting being so important in terms of doing it right, and then dosage comes into that as well. And so long and the short of it, in this the person that he had assisted with that experience, the cancer went away, done, gone, like no cancer. And he himself talks about, Dr. Gabor Mate talks about his ayahuasca experience, right? And ayahuasca, if you're familiar with it, it's basically a root in, I think, Peru, or I don't even know where. But anyways, they dig these roots out, they boil them, they put them, blah, blah, blah. And then they have a shaman who, administers it, and, blah, 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 that kind of a thing. And so it's a process that they've been doing for hundreds of years, right? In terms of using this natural substance as a curative. And again, so it kind of comes back to that whole thing about set and setting, right? Being able to kind of use that substance in a responsible way to have beneficial effects for the person ingesting it, and not harmful, right? And so that it can lead to these amazing healing breakthroughs. So yeah.
I think there's no question. I mean, again, Alan and I are not, we wouldn't tell you to go out and get an injection of penicillin either. Alan and I are not doctors. We're not medical professionals in any way. We're just a couple of dudes that aren't scared of asking questions and giving our opinion in public. And if that helps you in some way, fantastic. But we suggest that anytime you hear anything on our show and you think, oh, that'd be a good idea, ask somebody who actually knows stuff, because Al and I don't. We're just here talking about stuff that we read somewhere, right?
That's our official H3 disclaimer. Ask somebody who knows about this shit. Don't rely on what we've said. Yes.
No, I was going to say that, but yeah, that's the stuff. Talk to somebody who knows shit.
Yeah.
But I think it is a really good topic. And when I was doing research, a lot of it was coming up and saying, it was pretty much dismissed. The whole stoned ape thing was, basically laughed off as a joke. But it's coming around again, because science coming at it from different ways, not necessarily trying to prove that human religion and consciousness came from magic mushrooms, but saying, okay, what does this substance do to us? What does it do to the environment? Why is it here? Where did it come from? Has led to some answers that we weren't really asking the question about, right? That we're like, oh, okay, what are the neurological effects? And then we start looking at it and we're saying, well, these effects would be great if they were applied in this situation. And then we start looking and we're like, oh yeah, we have evidence of that. We've just sort of dismissed it as not being academic research, right? So I think that, coming from academia and a world where proving what you have to say is vitally important for sharing information, that sometimes folklore, common sense, all of that human experience has a lot of value. And I think that as we're the developed world, and, I'm a person of science, and I am, but I believe in a mythical being called God in my tradition, that I can't see and can't prove. And, does it improve the quality of my life? Sure. Is that right for you? I don't know. And I go back to the whole argument about cannabis legalization, right? And there's like, I don't know, here in Lethbridge, there's cannabis stores everywhere. Like on the west side, like they're everywhere.
Yep.
And so obviously there's a market. But I know one of our dogs, and if you've listened to our show, you know that my family are animal crazy. I grew up on a ranch, and now I don't live in a ranch, but we pretty much have a house full of animals always. One time we were in a menagerie. We had lizards and rabbits and dogs and birds. And anyway, our pug that we brought from Japan seemed to be struggling. She seemed to, when she was getting older, she seemed to be struggling. Took her to the vet, and he's like, "Yeah, she's got a tumor, quite a large tumor that has compressed her left lung, and she's running on one lung. And we can operate, but she's not a young pug. It might be nicer to think about putting her down." And if you're an animal lover, an animal owner, those are words you never want to hear under any circumstances for any reason. Because if you love animals, you're going to do it if they're in too much pain. But it's one of the most, it's like, euthanizing a child in a lot of ways. And I'm not, please don't flame me for saying that. I have children, and of course they're different. I would eat my dog before I'd eat my children, but I'm eating neither before I find a wild rabbit. So that's my... There's some instant wisdom for you. Yeah. But somebody suggested that we give the old pug CBD. I'm like, okay, if it's what is it going to hurt? So we started to give her CBD. Liked it. She come lick it off your finger, didn't mind taking it. And we started to see improvement. And the cancer stayed as far as we know, but her ability to breathe, her ability to do stuff improved. She was happy, and she finally passed away 5 years later, 4 years later, 5 years later, from old age, just common everyday old age. And we just gave her a microdose of CBD every day. If she seemed to be having some trouble as she got older, moving and arthritis and stuff, we gave her 2 doses. She felt better. She lived a better life.
Wow. So, and there's no placebo effect kicking in there. I mean,
that's like it. She had no idea. Like it could have been olive oil, right? Yeah. And it definitely improved the quality of her life. Yeah.
Brother Scott, do you have something to close us off? We're getting a little.
Oh my goodness, we're running over time. Yeah. So our final note on that is do a little research. It's interesting, and we don't suggest you just go out and double fist the stuff. That's a bad idea. But if it does interest you, there are practitioners, and as Al explained, in our region that may have the ability to use them in the future. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, my understanding is probably in this year, because they're growing the supply for it, right? That in this year that Health Canada will approve selected practitioners to be the dispensers of psilocybin mushrooms, of magic mushrooms. So yeah.
Oh, that's a breaking story. You heard it here first on H3.
Exactly.
So enough talk of magic from my very good friend Alan Friesen, the acapellist, and myself, Scott Sweetman. Have an amazing, healthy, and happy week. See you next week.
Next week, get a medicine.